quorum. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the Board of Directors meeting of SANDAG on Friday, April 30th, 2021. Welcome, everybody. Before we get started, I would like to ask our interpreter, Carlos, to introduce himself and to walk through how to access our translation services for today's meeting.
Thank you, Chair. As was indicated, we do have simultaneous interpretation available. In the event that there are comments in Spanish, you may choose to listen in English through the interpretation. To do that, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen, click on the interpretation icon, looks like a little world, and then select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app, cell phone, tablet, etc., you would first press the ellipsis, the three dots, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish law in the background. Buenos días. Como comentó la presidenta de la mesa directiva, vamos a contar con servicio de interpretación simultánea. Para hacer uso de este, por favor desplácese a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, es un globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish o español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, en celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Por último, si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Gracias, and thank you, Chair. This concludes my explanation.
Okay, well, thank you for explaining that. We did fall down a bit in this area at our last meeting, and we also on Wednesday night had some problems at our CMCP stakeholder meeting. So I just wanted to apologize for that as the chair, and also hand it over to our executive director, Hassan Ekrada, who I think also wants to explain and apologize.
Thank you, Chair Blackspear, board members, and those participating in this meeting. On Wednesday, SANDAG and Caltrans fell short in reaching non-English speaking communities at a stakeholder advisory group meeting. We had not hired translation services for that meeting, and that will not happen again. Take full responsibility for that, and we'll do better next time. The stakeholders had gathered with SANDAG and Caltrans staff to discuss the South Bay Sorrento Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan, also known as CMCP. For this, we strongly apologize. SANDAG firmly upholds equity and inclusion for every person in the San Diego region. And I know that Caltrans District Director Gustavo Deldardo, who's here today, is equally committed. We hold ourselves accountable to the communities we serve and acknowledge we had more to learn and more to change. Reaching as many in the community as possible is our goal as we work to improve transportation throughout our region. In the future, we will be more diligent about the inclusion of all community members, regardless of the language and cultural barriers. We have an obligation to eliminate disparity and ensure that accessible, inclusive, thoughtful, and safe opportunities are available to our communities. SANDAG is committed to creating a San Diego region where every person who lives, works, and visits can thrive. We will be holding another stakeholder meeting in Spanish soon. And myself and my partner from District 11, Director Gustavo, send a letter to all stakeholders apologizing, making no excuses, and committing to doing better next time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for taking that full responsibility. We are committed to having everybody participate. So we will do better there. Let's see. Now we're on to our Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, now we're on to non-agenda public comments. So we've separated out non-agenda board member comments for later in the agenda. And we will go to the public comments now. So Tessa, do we have any?
Chair Blakespear, I see Mike Bullock with his hand up. I believe he does have non-agenda public comments. Mr. Bullock?
Yes, good morning. Honorable Sandag Board, I'm Mike Bullock from Oceanside. I have written a peer-reviewed plan deriving a set of enforceable measures that result in cars achieving the industrialized world's first occurring science-based climate stabilization target. The target is also derived in that paper. The enforceable measures fall into two categories: those that increase fleet efficiency and those that reduce driving. Paper derives the mathematical relationship between a given greenhouse gas target and the fleet efficiency and the level of driving. The report is attached to the email I sent to you yesterday. That email is also available to the public thanks to your excellent Sandag process. Please provide the report to your city staff so they can incorporate its measures into your climate action plan. The first table in the email shows the primary fleet efficiency enforceable measures for 4 cases. In that table, purple denotes difficult, red denotes impossible. In one case, the percent of cars purchased that are battery electric needs to be 82% this year. That value is shown in red because it's not possible. The 4 cases run all require 99% of the cars sold in year 2028 be battery electric. So no case is easy. The easiest 2 cases require a driving reduction of 32%, which compares to your jack shoe resolution value of 30% if you assume that the 30% value conforms to the SB 375 convention, which it must, or it provides no help compared to the Air Resource Board value of just 19%. Table 2 of my email shows 8 enforceable measures required to achieve the 32% reduction in driving. Those measures need to be in the 2021 RTP. 2 are about bicycles, 2 are about zoning, 1 is about transit, 1 is a road use charge, and 1 is a modern, just, and green car parking system. That system was proposed by the plaintiff in the successful lawsuits against the county's bogus climate action plan. That car parking system belongs in the RTP, probably in the 5 big moves operating system. The parking system is defined in the email. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Chair Blakespear. We have one other public speaker under non-agenda comments, Nicole Burgess.
Good morning, Chair Blakespear, Board, and happy Friday to you all. I am just super excited as we roll into May Bike Month. I want to really thank Sandag staff and for initiating the efforts to celebrate Bike Month, and our wonderful Chair and Vice Chair, Mayor Blakespear, Vice Chair Todd Gloria, and Mayor Alejandra Solis. You look beautiful on your bikes, and I'm happy to see that you've pledged to bike anywhere this next month. And I encourage all others, and public and board members, to explore and enjoy our beautiful city by bike. Just a couple of things for inspiration. Look to Paris, Mayor Anne Hidalgo, and just be inspired how she has transformed the city of Paris to a more bikeable, walkable, people-centric city. And just as reference from another wonderful city, Denmark, just to note, 40 years ago, they were very, very similar to many of our American cities, very car-centric. Today, 85% of those trips are made by bikes. So we can do it. We have an amazing city. Every day is a beautiful day to ride a bike. And I just encourage you all to explore this beautiful city and get out there and enjoy this beautiful city by bike. So I just wanted to say thank you again, Sandag, and our board members that are really being bold to improve our city streets. Thank you so much.
Chair Blakespear. Gustavo Gallarda had his hand up. I believe he may have wanted to follow on comments that Hassan Ikrata had made. Gustavo, is that correct? Or do you have comments under member comments, item number 6?
Yeah, that is correct. I can make those comments now or wait until member comments. Thank you.
So if you would like to comment on what Carlos was saying, go ahead and do that. But if you're making member comments, then later.
I wanted to echo what Director Ikrata mentioned regarding the meeting on Wednesday.
Okay, go ahead.
So we want to reiterate what Director Ikrata mentioned. We have a great partnership with SANDAG, which means that we accomplish a lot of good things together, but sometimes we can make mistakes together. So we share in the responsibility for not securing interpretive services for the meeting that happened on Wednesday regarding the South Bay to Sorrento CMCP. So we want to make sure that the community hears us. We're very apologetic. We're very regretful for that. And we promise not to make that mistake again. We will make sure that since we share the same values with SANDAG of inclusion, we will make sure that we will keep the interpretation services like Carlos busy, not only for Spanish, but also for other communities that may need help in understanding and participating in the meetings and that we have and what we have to say, and also to secure their input. So apologies to the community, and thank you for bringing this up to us, to our attention. This is very important to us, and we take it to heart. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now we're on to our consent calendar. Unless there are any questions or public comments, I will entertain a motion.
Sotelo Solis, so move.
Moreno, second.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote.
Madam Chair,
Yes?
I think my hand's up.
Oh, let me see.
Yes, mine as
there.
well.
I do see your hands up. Okay. Mayor Hall.
Yes, I sent Francesca a copy of what I hope to get incorporated into the minutes. I mentioned this at the last board meeting under minutes. I can read them into the record again. I stated them once before, but I would just like to make sure that the record captures Mayor Bailey's and my comments, and that the minutes get revised. And I haven't seen that in these minutes, and my comments were copied in these minutes also. So if we could please be a little clear, I'd be very appreciative. So if you want me to read them again, I can. I have sent them in hard copy.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask our executive director. We have that information. We don't need him to read that. Is that right?
Yes, we'll take care of it, Chair Blakespear.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
We can.
I don't know if you received my email, Chair, with respect to item 5 in the ad hoc committee that you will be leading. I requested to be on that, and I haven't heard back. So if you can let me know.
Okay. Yes, thank you. You know, I appreciate your interest. I am recommending that the immediate past chair of SANDAG, Mayor Steve Voss, and I serve on that subcommittee. Given our experience in board leadership, it seems like the appropriate way to move that along. So these decisions will land back at the board here for us to deliberate and vote on. And of course, we'll keep the board and all of our interested parties updated throughout.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we have a motion and a second.
I'll begin the roll call vote. City of Carlsbad, Mayor Hall. And to be clear, this is on the
Aye.
consent agenda.
Yes, aye,
Thank you,
with the
Mayor.
corrections.
City of Chula Vista, Mayor Salas.
Salas, yes.
City of Coronado, Mayor Bailey.
Bailey, yes.
County of San Diego, Supervisor Lawson Ramar.
Yes.
City of Del Mar, Mayor Gasterland.
Yes.
City of El Cajon, Mayor Wells. Mayor Wells, I will come back. City of Encinitas, Chair Blake Spear.
Yes.
City of Escondido, Mayor McNamara.
McNamara, yes.
City of Imperial Beach, Mayor Dedina.
Medina, yes.
City of La Mesa, Councilmember Shu.
Yes.
City of Lemon Grove, Mayor Vasquez. I will come back.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Vasquez. City of National City, Mayor Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, go Padres, yes.
City of Oceanside, Councilmember Rodriguez.
Rodriguez, yes.
City of Poway, Mayor Voss.
Aye.
City of San Diego, Councilmember Moreno.
Moreno, yes.
City of San Marcos, Mayor Jones.
Jones, yes.
City of Santee, Mayor Mento.
Minto, I second go Padres. Yes.
City of Solana Beach, Mayor Hebner.
Hebner, yes.
City of Vista, Mayor Ritter.
Ritter, yes.
And I'd like to go back to City of El Cajon, Mayor Wells.
I'm sorry, my vote is yes.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll go back to City of Lemon Grove, Mayor Vasquez. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We did get you. Okay. That item passes unanimously.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So now we will move on to non-agenda member comments. And a quick reminder that Bike Anywhere Week is coming up next month. And I think Sandag has put together a little video here.
I took the pledge.
I took the pledge.
I took the pledge.
Leave your car at home and join thousands of people for Bike Anywhere Week, May 16 through 22nd.
Go by bike to work, to school, the store, the beach, around your neighborhood, or anywhere.
Take the pledge, pick up your free t-shirt, and have some fun with the self-guided activity. Take the pledge today and learn more at iCommuteSD.com.
Okay, well, that's great. It was the first time I've seen that.
I took the pledge.
You just listen to it once. So yes, so take the pledge if you're interested. And I also wanted to just make an announcement that, so Bike Anywhere Week, just for everybody, we used to do Bike to Work Day, but because of the pandemic and people biking a lot more, we've expanded it to be Bike Anywhere, to all the many trips that one takes in one's life, and to give it a try during this week if you haven't been biking and you want to get out there. So let's see, next we're a save the date for 2 educational workshops that we will be holding for the board on May 17th and May 21st. So the point of these workshops is we have our draft regional plan, which we want the board to be fully comfortable and understand what's in it, so that when we are making a decision as a board, there aren't questions about whether we have been able to engage all of our various questions and thoughts in advance. So we're hosting these 2 educational workshops, and they'll be similar to the sub-regional workshops if any of you have participated in those, which I did participate in one of those, and it was really useful, and I highly recommend it, because you can deep dive into the area where you represent the area that you're the mayor, the council member, or the supervisor. So this will allow us to get a better understanding of what these investments are that are being proposed, and also for the region as a whole. So please keep an eye out for those details. And with that, I'll now go to any other member comments, and then we will move on to our main agenda item, which we need to get to soon. So let's see, I don't see any other hands up from any board members. So we will move to our item number 7. So this is the 2021 regional plan aligning state, regional, and local planning. And I will hand this over to Hassan.
Thank you, Chair Blackspear, Vice Chair Gloria, Second Vice Chair Satala Solis, and members of the board. Good morning to all of you. Happy to be joining you virtually today to continue our discussion of the 2021 Regional Transportation Plan. My hope is very soon we will be inviting you to be in person meeting and discussing the future of transportation in this region. The regional plan, as I said many times, will transform our transportation system. The plan will also support the county and the cities throughout the region as we work to address a variety of challenges. Those challenges are many, but the opportunities are also great. As you know, we have a lot of work ahead of us to meet ambitious targets set by the state of California related to lowering greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled. We also have a tremendous opportunity to work together in a way we never have before, to align state, regional, and local efforts. Our partnership with the state is strong, and I want to thank Kate Gordon from the Governor's Office of Planning and Research for joining us today. I couldn't thank her enough for her leadership and for her collaboration with our region. And you will agree, she spoke to you before, but you'll agree she's one of the best in the business. Her partnerships mean a lot to us. When I joined Sandag in 2018, I made a commitment to Sacramento that if they gave us extra time, we would create a plan that meets our goal and truly transform how people and goods move in this region. We are grateful that the state did its part, and now we are doing ours. It will take much more continued collaboration, but I'm confident that our regional plan will serve as a model for the state and regional partnership. I believe our partnership with local jurisdictions are also strong. We are working closely with your staff to ensure the work we are doing at the regional level complements the work being done at the local level. I want to thank you all for encouraging your city staff to meet with us, talk throughout our shared challenges, and even participate in our panel today. One of the most pressing challenges we will share is need to combat climate change. We are fortunate in the San Diego region to have access to so many amazing academic and research institutions. And today we will hear from representatives of two of those prestigious institutions. Data and science are the foundation for our planning efforts, and we are honored to have these experts join our panel today. If we all work together, I have no doubt that we can get there. I want to emphasize what I said many times to this board, that we are debating one of the most important issues for the future of this region, and that is transforming not only the transportation, but putting forth a plan that's economically, environmentally sustainable into the future for many generations to come. As our chairwoman indicated, we scheduled 2 additional workshops to make sure that my team and I are ready to answer your questions. These workshops will be an opportunity for you to ask all the questions that still remain unanswered. So with that, I would like to hand this over to your planning director, amazing planning director, Colleen Clemenson, to start the presentation. Colleen.
Thank you. As Hassan mentioned, the regional plan is much more than just a transportation plan. And what we're here to discuss today is the tremendous opportunity we have as a region to align state, regional, and local planning efforts in a way that we have never done before. Also, as Hassan mentioned, it was state legislation that allowed Sandag to take additional time to develop a new vision for the 2021 regional plan. This additional time allowed us to use a data-driven process and to apply the latest technologies to create a future for our region that addresses all of our state and federal mandates, that addresses social equity in a meaningful way, and sets forth a transportation system that can address our mobility needs for generations to come. In today's presentation, we will be discussing the relationships among state, regional, and local planning, and how these relationships can be aligned to maximize quality of life benefits for the entire region. Today, we will hear from esteemed representatives from the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, the Planning Director from the City of San Diego, and the Deputy Director of Planning from the County of San Diego, and representatives from two of our prestigious local institutions, the Center for Climate Change Impacts and Adaptation at UC San Diego, and the Energy Policy Initiative Center, known as EPIC, at the University of San Diego School of Law. We'll set the stage with a brief staff presentation. Then we'll move to our panel presentation where you can hear from these experts and also allow time for you to ask them questions. We'll wrap up today by explaining what's in the 2021 regional plan that sets the stage and provides you the tools as local representatives for your local planning to really implement the vision you have for each of your jurisdictions. Aligning state, regional, and local planning is really about working collaboratively on our shared goals. Our shared goals around environmental protection and housing affordability, about mobility, how we get around, and equity so that everyone has equitable access. Together, all of these create the quality of life that make us proud to call this wonderful place home. The regional plan puts in place a comprehensive framework for addressing these shared goals. The regional plan will provide tools so you can be successful in your planning efforts. And this is where it goes well beyond just being a transportation plan. So here's what we're here to discuss today: how the state, SANDAG, and all of our member agencies can work together and support one another to ensure that we are all successful. How will we do this through the regional plan and other efforts and help each of you? We will be talking about that today. But to get an idea of some of the things that we've already done, we're not starting from scratch. We have a long history of working together, including sharing data and providing funds for our member agencies to achieve transformative results in your local projects. SANDAG has worked with many of you in developing your climate action plans. In fact, our region has 17 climate action plans, more than any other region in the state of California. And Kate Gordon, I know that makes you proud. We've helped with data collection and ensuring that we have consistent methodologies used across all of these plans. We know that the regional plan and this regional plan will put you all in a better position to make good on your local climate commitments. So for example, together through our environmental mitigation program, known as the EMP, we've preserved together more than 8,700 acres of habitat. This is another way we're showing our commitment to the environment. The electric vehicle charging program is a more recent success story where we partnered with the state and received more than $90 million worth of applications on the first day that the program launched last October. And then our Transnet grant programs have helped to reimagine how our communities grow through more than 150 smart growth and active transportation grants to our member agencies to provide infrastructure and planning grants and to support infill development, including affordable housing. We've also supported your local work to make our roadways safer, especially for people biking and walking. So at the regional level, we've invested $132 million in these smart growth and active transportation projects. This has been $80 million in grants, matched by $52 million in matching funds from all of you. These are just a few examples. And with the 2021 regional plan, we've included funding for programs to build upon these successes, to truly advance affordable housing and make investments in our environmental goal. Allison Wood, our regional plan project manager, will go over some more detail about each of these after we hear from our panel. So let's go to the panel. Our moderator today is Scott Anders. He's the director of the Energy Policy Initiative Center at the University of San Diego. And Scott has more than 20 years of experience working on and researching regulatory and policy issues related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and to advancing a low carbon economy. Scott and his team at EPIC have been part of energy and climate planning here at Sandag, and we know has also been a resource to many of you. So now I'll turn it over to Scott to introduce our esteemed panel.
Sure.
We cannot hear you.
Working on that, Chair. Be right with you.
How's that?
Good.
Can you hear me? Great.
Yes.
Sorry about that, everyone. Technical difficulties. But Colleen, thank you so much. Really appreciate being here. Happy to moderate this great panel of experts. And as Hassan said, our topic here today is aligning state, regional, and local planning efforts. And you know, I think I actually addressed a Sandag meeting several years ago where I likened this to a Russian nesting doll. You know, you have state policy in which you have regional policy in which you have local policy. And if those efforts are not aligned, the doll doesn't fit back together. So, you know, I really applaud the effort that Sandag has made to think about this as a kind of an alignment of policy efforts up and down the levels of government. So to help us to explore this topic, we have a great panel of experts. So maybe just for logistics, I will introduce the panelists. Then each panelist will present a short opening remarks, and then we'll have a moderated discussion, kind of a Q&A on these topics. So first, Kate Gordon is Director of the Governor's Office of Planning and Research and Senior Advisor to Governor Gavin Newsom on climate. Prior to that, she was the founding director of the Risky Business Project, which focused on quantifying the economic impacts of climate change.
Okay, thank you.
Partisan think tanks. Kate is a wealth of knowledge and experience, and she's going to tell us about some of the key state policies that affect regional and local planning efforts. Mike Hansen is the director of planning, director of the planning department in the city of San Diego, where he manages the formation of long-range planning policies that help shape the future growth of the city. Prior to that, he was responsible for land use, planning, and environmental policy in the mayor's office, first as director of land use and environmental policy, and then as deputy chief of staff and chief of policy. Mike's going to tell us a little bit about the city of San Diego's land use and climate planning efforts. Rami Tali is deputy director in the County of San Diego's Planning and Development Services Department, where he leads the department's long-range and sustainability planning efforts. Rami has over 20 years of experience in planning and management in the public sector, including as deputy director at the Abu Dhabi Urban Planning Council and as a planner in Southern California cities. Rami will present an overview of the county's climate action planning process and help us understand where they are in that process now. And finally, Dr. Mark Merrifield has spent the last 2 decades studying global and regional sea level change. His expertise includes sea level rise and climate variability, coastal oceanography, and nearshore processes. As director of the Center for Climate Change Impacts and Adaptation at UC San Diego, Mark supports and conducts research that advances the understanding of climate impacts and provides meaningful projections while preparing the next generation of scientists, engineers, and policymakers in risk assessments and adaptation strategies. Mark will tell us about the center's efforts to track and address climate impacts in our region. So to get us started, Kate Gordon is we're gonna do the panel in the same, or the presentations in the same order of those introductions. And so to kick us off is Kate Gordon. Kate, welcome.
Can folks hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Thanks so much, Scott, and also Hassan for the nice words earlier, and Chair Blakespeare and the board for inviting me to speak today. So I, as you heard, run the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. That is the office within Governor Newsom's administration that does long-range planning and particularly land use strategy, but also climate risk and resilience. And just thinking about the long-range impacts on our state of population trends, climate, and other impacts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our broad climate goals as a state and how that affects how we think about regional planning across the state. California, as you know, has long been a leader on emission mitigation goals, bringing down greenhouse gas emissions within our state boundaries and leading on climate policy for the nation and for the rest of the world. Our Governor Newsom continues to push forward on these goals as the rest of the world is frankly catching up. So we set very early goals on emissions, on carbon neutrality by 2045, most recently on a phase out of combustion vehicles as part of our overall zero emission vehicle strategy by 2035. A clean energy standard that at the time was groundbreaking, 100% zero carbon electricity by 2045. Several places have now gone to 2035 with that standard. And of course, conserving 30% of our land and water by 2030. You can go to the next slide. We're increasingly focused, though, not only on emissions reduction, which of course is the long-term global strategy to bend the curve on climate impacts, but also on the immediate impacts we are feeling today. I know Dr. Merrifield will talk about this as well, but this is a really serious issue for the state. My first week on the job came with PG&E's disclosure that it would file for bankruptcy based on the Camp Fire impacts. And very soon afterward, the ratings agencies downgrading all of our major utilities because of those physical risks and impacts to our energy system. We see impacts across every part of the state, but in this region, we really see, of course, sea level rise, which you'll hear more about, but also extreme heat. We had 3 of the hottest months in the history of California in 2020. And of course, wildfires, which unfortunately we're looking at ramping up again this year. These impacts affect primarily and mostly our most vulnerable communities across the state, and they affect every region of the state, but every region is affected differently. Next slide, please. These risks to our systems, our economic systems, from immediate physical climate impacts, as well as the overall need to transition the economy globally to carbon neutrality, are increasingly being seen by the private sector as a critical part of our economic planning and economic future. They're also being seen as a financial risk, not as a sideline kind of corporate sustainability initiative or even an environment social governance initiative from investment banks, but really as a mainstream set of risks and opportunities to the entire economy. And you'll see this ramping up all over the world, but most recently, of course, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen really taking on climate risk as a major part of her portfolio. I bring this up because it is increasingly a fiscal risk to us as a state, as well as to our regions. In California last year alone, we spent $1 billion with a B dollars on firefighting, and that was just people and equipment, not resilience, not adaptation, simply people and equipment. That was $650 million over the budget that we thought we would spend on firefighting last year. That is a significant and growing cost. And it's also a significant issue at the regional level, not only to your basic budgeting, but also to municipal bond ratings, to the ability to do infrastructure investments. Increasingly, it is becoming clear globally to the state and at the regional level that planning for a climate resilient future is not just a nice to have environmental issue, it's a must have financial and economic issue. As I said recently in a podcast that I was on with former Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, we wouldn't plan our economy without thinking about globalization. We can't plan our economy without thinking about climate change. Next slide, please. So the question is for you all, for us, for the state, how do we do that? How do we plan for a more sustainable and resilient economy while also protecting our most vulnerable communities? It's clear from the past year that we have to be paying attention to the inclusive nature and the equitable nature of our economy. We just suffered a major economic shock from COVID that really underscored fissures in our current economy. And I know Sandag just did a great report on the economic impacts of COVID. Given the underlying inequities and increasing shocks to the system from climate change and other impacts, how do we manage a recovery that's sustainable, resilient, and inclusive? Next slide. And how do we do that with, always in the back of our minds, bringing down those greenhouse gas emissions so that we reduce those impacts over time. So we actually start to mitigate those risks while adapting to them. We have to take a hard look here in California at the fact that transportation is the major greenhouse gas emission sector of our economy. We have to take a hard look at the challenges and opportunities around that. The last 70 years of planning in California got us to a place where we have a significant number of personal vehicles and a significant amount of driving. That transportation wedge has to be about not just what we drive in the zero emission vehicle push, but also how much we drive. Next slide. So doing that requires a different kind of climate strategy, a strategy that's really strategic around land use and planning, that really combines three things: prioritizing housing, your jobs and services, and where possible transit, but really reducing the amount that people need to drive, strategic conservation of our natural working lands outside of those high density areas, and then a focus throughout on sustainability, resilience, and equity. Next slide, please. And the state can't do this alone. So I'm really excited about Sandag's framework for the regional plan, because it really does take all of these factors into account. It takes planning for that future and looking critically at how different systems work together to create that more sustainable future. We're doing this at the state level as well. We're trying to align these frameworks. CalSTA, the Transportation Agency, has been asked by the governor to better align its discretionary funding with our climate goals, and frankly, to better mitigate climate risks. That CAPDI framework that you may have seen is very consistent with Sandag's regional approach on building a more integrated system of transportation, of active transportation, of more efficient and electric vehicles, and just doing projects that promote people-driven solutions and equitable solutions. Next slide. We're also doing a lot of work at the state level in my agency through the Strategic Growth Council, which I chair, on kind of demonstrating what this looks like on the ground. The Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities, or ASIC program, is a program that combines housing and transportation and workforce standards, actually, and climate adaptation strategies in individual projects. We've invested a significant amount of money in these projects across the state, including, next slide, the 13th and Broadway project, which was one of our first projects, which received about $20 million to build 273 units of service-enriched housing for homeless residents in the East Village of downtown San Diego. And this is an important project because it includes protected bikeways, walkway upgrades, pedestrian greenway, and also will increase bus service on the Rapid Route 225. So a good example of combining all of these goals into a demonstration project with state funding behind it to show that we're putting our money where our mouth is on these standards. Next slide. We also have to talk about, and I was glad to see it come up earlier, frankly, the two sides of the coin here. Increased access to jobs and services for everyone is a climate issue, it's a health issue, it's a quality of life issue. People do not want to be driving 90 minutes to get to work. People shouldn't have to do that. We can't do that for the climate. But at the same time, it's critically important we protect and conserve our natural and working lands in California, because they have so many different things to contribute to this conversation: reducing carbon emissions through actually sequestering carbon into land, building resilience. Our flood risk is lower, our fire risk is lower when we have land buffers between development and those fires and floods, protecting biodiversity, reducing urban heat impacts through cooling. The land in California plays such a critical role, and it has to be part of our solutions. And I'm, next slide, really proud to say that at the state, we're also putting money into this through the Sustainable Ag Land Conservation Program, which recently provided $250,000 in a planning grant to San Diego's LAFCO, which is a partnership with Sandag, actually, to identify and assess ownership of ag land in San Diego County and try to find strategic places to conserve that land from and protect it from conversion to urban uses, keep that as working land for working people and as part of our climate solution. Next slide. So I'll wrap it up there. There's a lot to talk about. I'm so excited to work with the region and with Sandag. We really see you as partners on meeting these critical goals that are not only state goals, they are national goals, they are global goals This is the economy we are moving forward, and we want to see San Diego lead. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Great, thank you, Kate. A great overview of some of the state policies and programs and activities. We're going to now move to Mike Hansen, City of San Diego.
Thank you, Scott. Excuse me. Thank you, Scott, and good morning, Chair Blake Spear and members of the board. I'm Mike Hansen, Director of the City of San Diego Planning Department. And for this presentation, we're going to give you an overview of how our local planning efforts coordinate and integrate with state and regional planning. And specifically, I'd like to focus on how our city's climate planning has interacted and really driven our land use planning at the local level, and really reoriented our efforts around reducing vehicle miles traveled, focusing growth near transit, and lowering our greenhouse gas emissions, which also facilitate the city's meeting the city's housing production goals. And all of these efforts together are extremely reliant on the regional planning and the efforts that SANDAG has undertaken with the regional plan. Next slide, please. Many of you may have heard of our climate action plan in the city of San Diego from 2015. This is actually something that we worked together on with Epic and Scott at USD. And this really set us on the path to be meeting our state goals for climate. And one of the main areas of focus of the climate action plan was making sure that our land use planning was aligned with our climate planning and focusing growth in the areas of the city that are closest to transit. Another big area of focus of the CAP is on resiliency and adaptation. And we are currently undergoing an initiative called our Climate Resilient SD Plan. That's our climate adaptation plan. Next slide, please. So this plan, Climate Resilient SD, is the city's plan to be preparing the city of San Diego for addressing the effects of climate change. And this is in the areas of sea level rise, wildfires, extreme heat, and extreme precipitation, such as heat, flooding and drought, for example. But what we're doing here, it's not just planning for adapting, but it's also preparing, recovering, and ensuring that the city of San Diego can thrive. It has a special focus on our most vulnerable populations who we know are at most risk of the effects of climate change. Next slide, please. So our climate action plan, it really kicked off a new way of thinking about land use planning in the city. That figure that you see in the middle, that's a map of our transit priority areas in the city. And the climate action plan in 2015, it really triggered a new way of thinking about planning in San Diego that focused our land use planning efforts in the areas that are near transit, a half mile from transit. And this is following our state legislation. So you can see how all these things interact with each other. This also led to a new program that we just passed several months ago called Mobility Choices. And this was our local implementation of the state vehicle miles travel shift at the local level. And what this really does is it focuses our infrastructure investments where the needs are greatest, where it's most cost effective, and where it also best aligns with our climate goals. Next slide, please. Over the past several years, we've also really, I think, reinvigorated our community planning program. So we have a program in the city where we update our community-specific land use plans. And this is done in a way that I think has really completely shifted to align with our climate planning. So to give you an example of that, we have worked together with SANDAG to identify where the region's infrastructure and transit investments are going to be. And then we take that and we identify the areas of the city where it makes the most sense to be doing our local planning. For example, with the Blue Line extension, we planned specific plans in Pacific Beach and Linda Vista to get ahead of that and to make sure that we're planning TOD for when the line opens. And then we currently are also undergoing a university and Claremont community plan update. So all along the Blue Line, we have local planning efforts undergoing. Also, for the future Purple Line, we did an update to our Kearny Mesa community plan and our Mission Valley community plan. And these completed plans all together equate to almost about 100,000 new homes, and that's capacity for new housing that we need to meet our RENA goals. Next slide, please. So we're doing so much at the local level in the city to reduce barriers to housing with a specific and particular focus on affordable housing. And so here we've been reforming our regulations. We've been creating new incentive programs for affordable housing. And we also have been taking the momentum of all of the new state legislation and tailoring those bills to the local level. And in many instances, actually going farther than the state bills where we felt it was appropriate for our local situation in San Diego, for example, with ADUs, with our affordable housing incentive programs. So there's really a synergy with our local, state, and regional planning here too. Next slide, please. And as we see it, this synergy, it's really a positive reinforcing cycle between our regional, state, and local planning. And I'd just like to give you one case study of that. We have land use changes that are happening across the city and across the region. In one instance, several years ago, we saw additional growth happening at San Diego State. And this drove the sense in the region that it was ripe to be investing in our trolley and our green line to be extending to San Diego State, which then in turn triggered local planning initiatives that we did at the City of San Diego for our Mission Valley Community Plan and our Grantville focused update to our community plan there, which created additional capacity for housing near transit. And we've seen great success in Grantville, and the recently completed Mission Valley Community Plan, we expect the same too. And this also has then in turn played into the regional planning efforts where Mission Valley and Grantville are now considered mobility hubs for the region. And then the cycle really continues because we are now doing a college area community plan to make sure that we're continuing this investment in local planning to support our state and regional climate goals. Next slide, please. So Sandag's regional planning efforts are extremely important to the city. It really helps us frame and focus where our local planning efforts should go, and also ensures that we have the infrastructure and investments that support the needs at the local levels. And this is especially important that we make sure that all of our communities have the same access to the resources that support housing, support community development. And those infrastructure investments and also in turn help us meet our GHG, our VMT goals, and align us with state climate planning. And it's really for these reasons and how these things are all interwoven together that we at the city strongly support the efforts that Sandag has undertaken with the regional plan. And we actually feel that it's necessary for us to meet our local goals, our housing goals, our transit goals, and our equity goals. So excited to have a discussion with the panel, and thanks again for including the city in the discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. And we're going to move now to Rami from the County of San Diego.
Good morning, Chair and members of the board. I'm Rami Telly with the county's Department of Planning and Development Services. At the county, we're very excited about the opportunities that lie ahead and the direction provided to us by the Board of Supervisors to put together a plan that will get us to net zero carbon emissions by 2035. In my presentation, I'll highlight some of our current efforts, provide an overview of the unincorporated areas context, introduce some aspects of our climate action plan, and identify areas for opportunities. Next slide, please. The County of San Diego has long been committed to sustainability efforts that include improving access to healthy lifestyles, encouraging physical activity, conserving open space, and reducing waste. In fact, we have many programs that support climate action planning and the outcomes listed on this slide. Some of the programs to note include the county's electric vehicle roadmap to support the conversion to EVs within the unincorporated area and at county facilities. Another is the Regional Decarbonization Framework, which will outline steps that the region can take to decarbonize our energy, transportation, and waste management sectors. As part of the Board of Supervisors' increased commitment to climate change and environmental equity, we have a new Climate Advisory Committee that will guide our current efforts to update the county's climate action plan. Next slide, please. Our approach to updating the CAP consists of 5 major steps. The first 2 steps include setting a baseline inventory of community-wide greenhouse gas emissions and projecting those emissions into future years. This will tell us where to focus our efforts and how much reductions are needed. Much of this is dictated by the makeup of the unincorporated area communities, their location, and land use settings. Next slide, please. The unincorporated area is approximately 22 million acres and has a population of over 500,000 people. When considering tribal lands, state and federally owned lands, and military installations within the unincorporated area, the county retains land use jurisdiction over 772,000 acres, or 35% of the area. It's in this area that the county regulates land uses based on the goals and policies contained within the general plan. Next slide, please. The general plan was updated in 2011 after extensive engagement with community groups, individuals, agencies, and elected officials. Changes to the general plan included reducing the residential unit capacity by approximately 46,000 units, or 15%. The update also focused development in village cores surrounded by low density and very low density development. This shifted 20% of the residential capacity to the most western portion of the unincorporated area and located 80% within the county water authority boundary, closer to infrastructure, availability of transit, and other services. Next slide, please. An emissions inventory conducted in 2018 shows us that a majority of the unincorporated area's emissions come from on-road transportation at approximately 45%. This is followed by emissions from electricity use in buildings and waste generated and disposed of in landfills. In total, the unincorporated area's emissions were approximately 3.2 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. Our business as usual scenario assumes a continuation of current behaviors. In this scenario, emissions generally increase as a result of population and job growth. The second scenario accounts for a variety of state and federally approved legislative actions that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions locally, such as vehicle efficiency standards. For the CAP update, the greenhouse gas reduction targets will be set to reduce emissions to achieve a 2030 target in accordance with SB 32 and net zero target by 2035, in line with the governor's executive order and the Board of Supervisors direction. Once these targets are set, the county can then estimate the local gap, which is the specific amount of greenhouse gas emissions the county is responsible for reducing through CAP strategies and measures. Next slide, please. We're currently updating our baseline inventory and projections, and will work with county leaders and community members to develop strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. These strategies may differ from those found in urban communities with access to transit services, and will need to reflect suburban and rural communities found in the unincorporated area with fewer transit opportunities. Generally, climate action efforts in rural communities rely more heavily on energy efficiency, increasing renewable energy, and focusing growth within villages. Next slide, please. The greatest opportunity for alignment with regional planning involve taking advantage of innovative transit solutions that extend services to those villages within reach of existing infrastructure, like the flexible fleets proposed as part of the regional plan. This could open up greater synergies between land use planning and transit availability in the unincorporated area to provide a greater reduction of emissions. At the county, we're committed to working with all of you to explore these opportunities and ensure a sustainable future. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rami. And our final presentation is Dr. Mark Merrifield from UCSD.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you to the chairman and the board for this opportunity. Wanted to talk a little bit about how academia can play a role in planning for climate change, and we'll focus mostly today on sea level rise. And this statement here, which is follows a lot of the climate projections, that says that by 2100, San Diego flooding days will occur almost daily. So almost every high tide will be a flooding day under certain climate change projection scenarios. This is sea level, but similar statements can be said about heat events, heat waves, the fire risk, the occurrence of extreme storms. So there are a lot of considerations that I think follow the same model that we're putting forward with sea level. What this threat calls for then is a need for accurate early warning systems, because what will the expression of sea level rise and the threat to the community is in the increase in the number, frequency, and duration of extreme events. There's also a need for observations to understand how the coastal zone is changing, so just sort of baseline observations, and also how to use observations in adaptive strategies. So let's start first with the warning systems. There are portions of San Diego that are already experiencing flooding. One of them is Imperial Beach. This is a project that we did in collaboration with Mayor Serge Zadina and his team. And it's asking the question, what sort of observations and what sort of system do we need in place to give Imperial Beach advance warning of when floods are going to come, just on an event-by-event basis. Also to give a sense of, like, for the coming winter, is this going to be a particularly eventful winter or not? And how should we think about these flood events in the context of long-term change? So the team put together a host of scientists who came down and kind of rigged up this area with all sorts of observations and some of the best models available. And we tried to do a state-of-the-art experiment where we're actually trying to test all the components of the system and then trying to ask what is the subset of this that we can make operational for any city along the coast. And what you see in the bottom left there is just this sort of notion that you can provide, like on a tide chart basis, when flooding might occur. We also have maps that we can provide on to give that same kind of information. The next slide, please. So this is the kind of information that we need to think about when we also think of not only just in preparing for an event, but how do we assess and plan for adaptive strategies to protect our coastlines. So on the right-hand side here is an example, the Cardiff Living Shoreline, which is an important test site where the engineering of the shoreline in a more natural state, how is that protecting the nearby roadway? Also beach nourishment, which is of course used quite frequently here in San Diego and quite costly. How effective are these as sea level continues to rise? And on the left here, it's how observations might be used in these assessments. So what it comes down to is, how long can I use beach nourishment, or when, at what point is that no longer a viable option? So what we need are trigger points, and we need trigger points in advance of when that option is no longer a true option, so that we can plan accordingly. So how do you build triggers into a system? Observations are key for that. On the bottom left here, you're seeing plots of beach width at 2 locations in the North County from San Diego observations, also supplemented by scripts. And so obviously how wide the beach is one measure that you might use as an adaptive trigger. But you can see there's quite a bit of variability there. The low points are El Nino events. There's year-to-year changes that are owing to changes in the wave field. There's a sea level rise signal here that's hard to pull out. And so it's going to take some work to analyze these trigger time series and to come up with actionable sorts of solutions. Next, please. The other, I think, opportunity that comes from bringing in academia is just bringing in a state-of-the-art technology. So we all know that North County has a cliff erosion problem, and that's a particular concern for Sandag, given that the train line is right along the cliff there and quite vulnerable to these landslides. So Scripps has developed a monitoring system where, using truck and airborne LiDAR, we've been mapping these cliffs and the underlying beach all along the county there for some time now, measuring change and trying to understand what triggers a landslide, the combination of heavy events and heavy waves, strong waves that lead to these collapses. And can we develop a sort of a risk system for cliffs along the shoreline, which will give us some indication. And also, as we try to fortify these cliffs, what would be the most effective pathway? So in all these situations, I think it's highlighting the role that science can play. It's also, these are all being done on sort of at different levels by different groups. It would be great to organize this into a true observing system for San Diego County, supported by regional, local, and state support. I think Scripps is an important catalyst for all that, and we're looking forward to playing that role for not only for sea level, but for other climate stresses.
Great, thank you, Mark. So lots of great information, good overviews. So I've got some prepared questions to get the conversation started, but I thought maybe I would start by asking the panelists if you heard anything in the other panelists' presentations that struck a chord that you want to comment on, you know, something that you want to emphasize or applaud, anything. Maybe Kate, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I mean, I think we all sort of live and breathe this stuff, but I will say I wanted to emphasize something Rami said, which is when we're thinking about not only are different regions different, and we're really in the state focusing, and the governor's very focused on sort of regional planning and bottom-up planning and thinking about how different places have different solutions, but within regions, different places have different solutions. As Rami pointed out, I think it's a really important point he made, that vehicle mile travel reduction, for instance, isn't just an urban strategy. It's not just about, you know, sort of city centers where there happens to be good transit access. We're really talking about, you know, jobs near housing, near services to the extent possible. And that works in all kinds of different landscapes. It works with small towns, it works in rural centers. There are all kinds of ways to achieve these goals for different parts of the region. So I think that's a really important point that we just continually try to emphasize, because people sometimes think, oh, you're talking about density in VMT, that's only, you know, downtown San Francisco or downtown San Diego. It's really not. This is really, as we found in my office, a strategy that works in every county, in every part of the state, in every type of development.
Great, thank you. Any of the other panelists have any similar kind of reactions to the other presentations?
I appreciated Kate's comments on reducing road time. And I guess one of the byproducts of this COVID period is just seeing how beautiful, how wonderful the transportation system can be when it's a little less crowded in San Diego. And I think it's, you know, I think we got a glimpse of what that future could look like, and it's really appealing.
Mike or Rami?
For me, it's a reminder of how important it is to work together with our academic institutions and really focusing on the science as we're moving forward on our update to our climate action plan and on our climate resiliency plan. And we really do rely on the data to inform our decision-making and our planning. And to me, this is just a great reminder of how we all sort of play a part in what's really a statewide issue and a global issue. And we are really, I think, in sync.
Great.
You know,
Rami, final words?
Yeah, to build on what Mike was saying is that I just greatly value the different perspectives, because if we're going to, you know, reach our goals, it's going to be collective effort, state, local, regional efforts, and hand in hand with academics. And I think that, you know, opportunities and forums like this help us work together and identify those areas of agreement, areas of shared interests, and finding solutions together.
Great. Well, I'd like to maybe start off the conversation talking about maybe the bigger picture, or maybe the bigger goal we have here, which is carbon neutrality. We heard Rami talk about net zero as a target, and you know, Kate, you laid out some of the state policies, but it's this, you know, this notion of carbon neutrality by, say, mid-century, which is really becoming the magnetic north of climate planning. And so I wonder, you know, one of the challenges I think I've noticed here locally and regionally is it may mean different things to different people. What does it even mean to be carbon neutral or to achieve net zero? And how is the state thinking about getting to that target?
That's a big question, and an important one. I mean, I think that the key thing from a state perspective, we're looking. It's an enormous state, and there are multiple regions, all of which interact with each other very directly. So our resources flow around the state, whether that's food, whether that's oil and gas, whether that's wood products, whether that's people. Our commute sheds are big. Our trade and logistics is across the state. So I think one of the things for us at the state level, just to keep in mind, is that we have to look at all of those interactions. So many cities have taken on net zero pledges. If you do that at a city level, you can think about your city boundaries and you can think, how do I get to net zero? And one thing we see internationally when that happens is that cities sometimes take that as an opportunity to kick all the manufacturing out of the city because it helps them with their net zero pledge. We can't do that as a state, right? I mean, we really have to look at interactions and at the state as a whole and at the economy and economic growth, and how do we keep our economic growth and our economy stable. So to me and to us, carbon neutrality is about balancing a lot of different factors. It's about kind of doing everything at once. Frankly, there's sort of three big things, or four. Electrifying as much as we can is a really important part of getting to net zero or carbon neutrality. Making sure that electricity is as renewable as possible is a big part of it. Using as little of it as possible is a big part of it. So those three are sort of the lodestars of decarbonization. But then you've got to get beyond that to a couple of other pieces, particularly in California. One of them is there are hard to decarbonize sectors. They are very, very hard. Concrete, steel, some of our other industrial processes, tough to decarbonize, but still a critical part of the economy. Every wind turbine is 80% steel. Every time we do a affordable housing development that's LEED platinum, it has concrete and steel in it. I mean, these are part of our economic world. So how do we think about those hard to decarbonize sectors? And that gets us to carbon removal, which is actually a really important part globally and at the state level of the strategy. How do you do carbon capture and sequestration from those plants? How do you think about land's value in storing and sequestering carbon? The other big piece of it that we've talked about here, that's particularly an issue for California, is of course that we have to do all these things with an eye toward resilience. As we're thinking about moving toward an electric future, that puts a lot of new load on our power grid. How do we make sure the grid itself is resilient? That obviously has been a big issue for the state in the last couple of years. How do we make sure that things are flowing across the state in a way that actually makes sense, that we're capitalizing on the huge amount of solar power we have in the state, the huge amount of wind power we have and could potentially have offshore in the state, managing that load so that we're as resilient as possible. So it's a lot of different interactions, Scott, among a lot of different parts of the state. But I guess my kind of point to and why I like the Sandag approach is that we actually increasingly realize this is a regional strategy, not a local strategy. Local governments have a huge part to play in it, Mike. I'm not saying they don't, but their regions, our economy works regionally, our climate impacts are regional. Everything about what I'm talking about is ultimately a regional set of impacts and solutions. So we have to do a better job at making those connections really clear and really aligned, state, regional, local. So we're not inadvertently, frankly, kicking out a problem from one area, just going to another area, because that's not a solution.
Kate, I'd like to pick up on that last point you made, which you kind of started with and you ended with, which is, in our region, we have 19 jurisdictions and we have 17 climate action plans, as Colleen said at the beginning of the panel introduction. And so we certainly don't want cities we don't want to pit cities against one another in terms of reaching targets. And, we've seen some regional activity or multi-city activity around community choice aggregation and high levels of renewable energy. I would like to ask Mike and Rami about that. How do you see, how do we embody the spirit that Kate is talking about, where it's not a city by city approach, although of course cities have land use authority and there are certain things cities have to do, but how do we transcend those city by city plans to create this kind of regional plan where 1 + 1 is greater than 2? So maybe Mike, we'll start with you.
Sure, I have a couple thoughts there. So one is on our climate action plan. We were maybe perhaps a little bit ahead of some of the other cities in the county, but following the adoption of our CAP, we had a lot of good discussions with many other jurisdictions on what did we do, how did we overcome obstacles. So I think a lot of it is just sort of the informal discussions that we have on a day-to-day basis. But we did also then work with a regional climate collaborative as well. So there is regional coordination happening. And we also have been tracking some state legislation that is looking to ramp that up even further for regional climate planning, especially in the area of resiliency. So I could see that if that passed, that could be another way that we leverage that regional formal network to be making sure that all of our local efforts are synced up.
Rami, any thoughts?
Yes, certainly. I think the first thing would be to distinguish, which efforts really help us meet our net zero goal, and separate those from our efforts to reach our 2030 targets. And they're not always exclusive or the same, because you might have different strategies for 2030 and a different strategy for net zero. I think one of the goals of the boards of supervisors was to create a regional framework for decarbonization, to kind of set the table, so to say, for all of our jurisdictions to work together towards that common goal. So I think that's one action. The other is, really working around environmental justice, and that's where our 2030 actions or measures can kind of work together. And so, local jurisdictions could partner, for example, to address the needs of one specific community, where there's a greater opportunity for co-benefits of GHG reductions, and where you may not be able to achieve those same reductions within your own jurisdiction. So I think that's one opportunity as well.
Oh, Rami, that's you're all making this easy for the moderator here, because these are really key points, and you're sort of ending on great points. And so the point about equity is really important, because as mentioned at the beginning, equity is a key piece of SANDAG's our regional planning process. Kate, you mentioned it as just a integral part of what the state is doing, and I know that now here in our region there's some activity around equity embedded into climate planning. And so maybe Kate, can you maybe give us your kind of top 2 or 3 points about equity that you think we need to hear? I know that's a tall order, but just a couple thoughts on equity.
I like how you keep giving me these really small, easy questions, Scott. I mean, equity is a foundational part of everything we've been talking about, honestly. I mean, what we have really seen, again, I think this last year has just been a wake-up call in some ways, or just not a wake-up call, but sort of underscored why this is so important, because it has just deepened the fissures of inequity that were in our existing system. And that isn't just economic impacts on specific industries. If you look at SANDAG's report on the industry impacts of COVID, you see that the industries with the lowest paid workers, who are the ones who have to go in to work, that's retail, that's tourism to some extent, that's services, were the most affected, had the most job loss, right? So you've got this simultaneous sort of huge hit on these essential workers. They're also the ones that are driving. I mean, and one thing we've seen is across the state, a number of households that have been, 4 people in the household are working. Some of them have cars, some of them are dependent on transit. Transit impacts have made some of them buy new cars. We've got now 4-car households in some cases with 4 essential workers driving around, for long distances to their essential jobs. That is not a functional economy at all, for multiple reasons, from a climate reason, economically, from an equity perspective. So I'm mostly just underscoring that equity is a lot of things. It is, very direct impacts because of where people live, from polluting industries and polluting impacts from, whether it's highways, whether it's industrial facilities, whether it's other, truck idling, whatever. It is also looking at, as we talked about before, and Dr. Merrifield talked about, the most vulnerable communities to climate impacts. That's not something that's been incorporated into a lot of our equity metrics. We actually at the state and my office are developing with Greenlining and APEN, 2 EJ organizations, a vulnerable community mapping tool that actually allows us to start looking at that physical climate impact piece. It's also, though, the fact that we tend to track housing affordability as the key affordability metric in the state. We don't think about transportation affordability. So we don't incorporate that. We say, oh, you're living in an affordable home. Forget that it's an hour and a half away from your job. We don't incorporate those critical transportation impacts, whether it's time spent or money spent on parking, on maintenance. So we have to start being much more broad about our terms, I think, and also really just make this part of every conversation. It's not a side project. It's really every single decision we're making in putting our general plan together, in our specific plans, in our regional plans, in our decisions about siting and land use have to be thinking about this, because we are trying to counteract 70 years of not thinking about it, but it's more critical than ever, honestly, in the state. So I know that was a long answer, but it's a hard question.
Yeah, maybe Mark, Kate sort of called you out a little bit here. So do you have any thoughts on the intersection between, or further thoughts on the intersection between the climate impacts? I know you focus a lot on sea level, but maybe broader than that, and equity. So sort of this intersection between equity and climate impacts.
Yeah, we're trying to focus on urban heat islands. So we're looking at the issue of where the hotspots are and how people deal with it and how that varies with at different parts of the community. I think also just in terms of getting back to the coast, one of the issues with the shoreline is that I grew up in Southern California and in the inland area, and I knew that during the summer the beach was, sort of the spot to be. And I think a lot of the citizens of San Diego rely on access to recreation and whatnot for the coastal zone. So protecting that is not just about protecting housing and property, but it's protecting a resource for all of San Diego.
That's a great point.
Just Scott, really quick on Mark's point about heat. I just wanted to underscore the point about heat. Extreme heat is the highest mortality climate impact by far. It's the most serious from a public health perspective, and it's probably the one that most affects lower income folks. If you look at Sacramento, just did a really interesting map of where the trees are in the city, and it's incredibly stark where we have tree cover and where we don't in our cities in California. It's deeply inequitable, and it's actually, the good news, one of the lowest cost things to deal with when it comes to climate impacts. Cool roofs, urban greening, resilience centers. There's stuff you can do at the local level that's pretty direct and pretty immediate and really, really important from an equity standpoint and a health standpoint.
So in the context of, the bigger picture, the way I started with carbon neutrality. So as Kate described, we need to basically reduce emissions as far as we can, and then remove as much as we can to try to get to zero. So natural and working lands are playing a more and more important role in this process. We heard about the governor's executive order in Kate's presentation, but Rami, I wanted to turn to you. Your map was pretty interesting. Even though the county has such a humongous footprint, not all of it is under county authority, but I wonder how you're thinking about the natural and working lands piece, about sequestering carbon in natural systems in your climate planning.
There's a couple of strategies that we're taking. First, it's conservation of open space. And so we have several initiatives to work with wildlife agencies, environmental groups, and landowners in North County and East County to establish the multiple species conservation program, which works hand in hand with conservation efforts and allowing for development to occur where it's more appropriate. And that will result in preservation of land, which does several things: preserve habitat, but as well as avoiding development that would have occurred. And along those lines, we're working with the agricultural community to identify techniques for carbon farming and see how that would help with our overall strategies, but also putting in place programs to promote ag uses and keep them active, keep them vital. We have a program called the Purchase of Agricultural Easements, where the county's actively buying easements on agricultural properties, which is extinguishing development rights, and then providing the farmers with an infusion of cash to keep their operations going. And so all of that, and working with the state and the tribal governments in the unincorporated area, so that we are aligned in our strategies.
Great. Well, we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna maybe ask one more question, and then maybe if we have remaining time, we can just do kind of a lightning round of final thoughts if time permits. But Mike, I wanted to go to you and maybe end on a question around the 5 big moves. So we've heard a lot about the 5 big moves, and interestingly here, our jurisdictional representatives are the largest city in the region, and then the most populous, and then the most rural jurisdiction in the region. And so I wonder if you have thoughts about how the 5 big moves and the kinds of things that Sandag is envisioning can work in both of those contexts.
Well, we think the 5 big moves is essential for both the city of San Diego as well as the region. So the city is not on an island, of course. We're part of an integrated system that spans throughout the county and also across county boundaries. And the regional plan is a regional vision for how to invest and how to deliver infrastructure that supports our local agencies, not just the city of San Diego. But for us, it's extremely important, because without it, it's going to be very challenging to hit those climate goals, the housing goals, and to have the investment that we need to support our communities and make sure that everybody in the city is benefiting and has access to the resources that they need to have a thriving community. So I think that at the high level, all cities share those sort of concerns, and we're all kind of living in the same system, and we all live in the same state of California. So I feel like it is possible for us to all get as much aligned as possible, to deliver on these goals that I think that we all share.
And maybe Rami, any thoughts on the application of these 5 big moves to a more rural place like the unincorporated county?
Yeah, we're very reliant on the efforts and the vision of Sandag in the regional plan. Local agencies don't have jurisdictions over the emissions from tailpipe, the transportation sector, and are relying on those transportation investments made at the regional level, so that we can align our land use plan and our greenhouse gas emission strategies around those. So, it's vital and very important for us. One of the things that, for me, our key takeaway from the RTP is the focus on technology and how to leverage new technologies to provide services in the rural communities. And so we're very optimistic about the autonomous vehicles, flexible fleets, and how transportation or transit in general can be a bit more flexible with smaller vehicles to get to far off places like the unincorporated communities.
Great. So we have just a couple minutes left, and maybe we can do kind of a lightning round. So we'll go in the order that you presented, and maybe just tell us, is there a point that you wanted to make that I didn't ask about? Do you, final thought, kind of, 30 seconds-ish. So Kate, we'll start with you.
All right, super quick. It follows what Rami just said. I think it's important to note we're just in a new era. It's a transportation transformation. It's an economic transformation. It's happening everywhere, but it's exciting. There are new technologies. There are new innovations. There's on-demand van pools. There's e-bikes that can get us way further than they used to be able to. There's autonomous vehicles in rural areas are really, really interesting innovation. So there's lots of exciting stuff happening. I would just say this isn't a step backward, it's a step forward. And I think there's opportunity for every part of the region.
Great. Mike?
My takeaway is I think we're at a unique moment in time, and we are at a pivotal point, and it is really exciting. I think that the regional planning that's been done by Sandag, as well as the planning at the state level, it's really reinvigorated our local planning in the city of San Diego. And we've taken it as a positive thing to customize at our local level and ensure that we can deliver on achieving our local goals. I'm just kind of excited to hear that everyone does seem to be generally aligned, and we are looking forward to working together closer as a region.
Great, thanks. Rami?
We're really excited moving forward to build upon and improve on the efforts that were already in place at the County of San Diego. The thing that excites me the most is, this focus on equity, because we understand the strategies already to get to carbon neutrality. Those strategies are known, but where the opportunity is how do you translate those strategies on the local level in the communities, and how those strategies, when materialized into measures, can differ from community to community. And that's where I think it gives us the opportunity to engage with our stakeholders and community members, have those conversations, and really come out with better outcomes when you have that entire process around the discussions with your community members. So I think that's where, for me, that's where the most exciting part is.
Great, and Mark, you get the final word.
Well, I guess one thing I didn't mention, which I wanted to add, is that first of all, alignment is obviously key here. I mean, it's going to be an expensive, hard endeavor, but the more that we can coordinate and align our efforts, the more effective we'll be. And it seems like Sandag is in a really great position to be a leader for the region. I wanted to also add that UCSD is training the next generation of the workforce that's coming forward. And I think alignment between education and societal needs is becoming more and more of an issue.
Great, well, thank you all so much. I think we now are going to go to questions from the board.
Yes, well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. And thanks to all our panelists, Scott, Kate, Mike, Rami, and Mark. And so back to you, Chair Blakespear. I think we set aside about 15 minutes here for questions and discussion with the board.
Okay, thank you very much. I do see two board members' hands up, but I wanted to ask a question to start it off here. So first, I want to recognize and thank you for your expertise and your vision and linking together the very highest aspirations with the planning that we're doing on the ground. To me, as a local municipal elected leader, I feel like the biggest roadblock is not to conceive of transportation transformation and the amazing innovations, but it's to actually communicate, educate, bring the public along who we represent, because as we're communicating to people that their lifestyles will dramatically change, whether that's an individual road project of saying we're going to have a road diet here where one of your car lanes will go away, but you'll be able to have a walking path and a bike path. There's a tremendous opposition to changes like that. And that's similar with adding density and adding transit to places where people have traditionally driven. And so I just want to ask the panel, since you are so involved in this dialogue, if you have any insights about how we can help move along faster in that area, because a lot of times it does fall to us as elected leaders to make those decisions, and we need to do it in conjunction with the communities we represent, not in opposition to them. And so that, that's a major place where we have a lot of work, and it's a heavy lift to do. And those of us who are elected do it every day. But I just wanted to know if any of you had any thoughts on that.
I could take that. Thank you for the question, Chair Blakespear. So in my opinion, we do have some work to do here. I think that there are some new opportunities, however, at the same time, to really rebuild the trust and be enhancing the trust with communities. I think it's important to have a fair process and a thoughtful process for whatever we do, so that regardless of the outcome, people do feel that their voice was heard, that the input that we're getting is representative of our entire city. And I do think we do have some work to do there as well. We do have some opportunities with new technologies. So, and I think that everything that we've learned with COVID is also an opportunity to make sure that, that we're connecting with people that might normally not participate in our local planning process. And maybe not be afraid to rethink some of the things, some of the ways that we've been doing things for a long time. And I know that's hard to do sometimes at the local level. It's maybe a first reaction to be a little bit defensive, but I think it's okay to acknowledge that we do have some work to do in this area, but being forthcoming, building that trust and making sure that the process is strong, I think are the most important things that we can do.
Chair Blake,
just-
I might add, oh, go ahead, Kate. So I would just say,
really you go.
sorry, there's a bit of a delay. So I would add, building off what Mark Merrifield said earlier about seeing what uncongested roads are. We kind of forget what they are. And so I think there's an important role to, the other thing I would talk about, say, is we're always talking about tons and miles, and it tends to get nerdy and technical. And I think we lose sight of the human aspect of what we're talking about. And so one way I think as a region that might be really interesting is to create kind of a vision of, I don't know what that is, a document, a video, a visioning process. And I know Sandag went through this in a way for the regional plan, but I mean, so to help people see what it's like, what is a day in a life like for a San Diegan or a San Diego County resident in 2050, and how is it different? How is it better? And how might it change? I think that kind of human aspect is missing sometimes from some of the planning work. At least I'll say that we EPIC.
Can I just go off of that too? Because I think we fall back into our wonky planning speak so often, VMT, GHG, this, that. I mean, it's like, if I'm just somebody living in San Diego trying to go about my daily life, I'm not sure I even know what you're talking about. So we've got to kind of bring it down to more of a human level of what does this mean for me in my daily life, just as was just mentioned. So I couldn't agree more.
And does Kate want to make a quick comment on this question?
Thanks so much, Chair. Really quickly, and building off of Mike's point about trust, I also think we just have to be honest. Look, every action in this space has an equal and opposite reaction somewhere else in the system. Breaking down those silos, you're better at it at the local level than we are at the state level. But let's just, if we're going to increase bike access, let's make sure people have bikes. If we're going to, and that they have the ability to be closer to their jobs. If we're going to talk about VMT reduction, we have to talk about increased housing production in the places that are closer to jobs and services. You can't disaggregate those things. They are all part of the same conversation, and the same conversation with land conservation and climate adaptation. This is all the same system. And it's hard for us as government people to take systems approaches. We're not set up to do it. Our committees in the legislature don't do that. Our agencies don't do that. But ultimately, climate is a systems approach and planning is a systems approach. And I think that people just need to hear us be honest about that. Look, we're doing this over here. It might have these impacts. We're dealing with those impacts over here. Let's talk about it.
Okay, thank you. I'll call on our board members who have their hands up now. So Council Member Shu.
Thank you, Chair Blakespear, and thank you, panelists. I've learned a lot today. I have 3 questions, but I only require short answers, so I hope I don't take up too much time. Sometimes it's good for us to look towards the back, our past, so that we know what questions to ask as well as how to go forward. 10 years ago, Sandag refused to validate the math of one of our commenters, Mike Bullock, with regards to how much VMT we need to reduce. So my question to Director Gordon is his math okay? It's peer validated, 30% VMT reduction. Is that a valid number, and is math okay? The next question with regards to the City of San Diego's climate action plan, it calls for a 50% mode share for walk, bike, and transit in our urban core. When are you going to reach that with a certain plan for the city? So that's a hard one for Mike. And another one for Rami. You talk about a climate action plan for the county, but let's face it, you don't have a legal one. For that matter, the county never really had a climate action plan. But moving forward, the county is moving on a specific plan for our alpine area, increasing housing in rural areas and actually imposing housing into our open space, into Cleveland National Forest properties. Define the Cleveland National Forest as conservation plan. This will obviously increase VMT and take away some of the space we have for carbon sequestration. Will the county curtail or at least review this action in which the county is obviously going to increase VMT and greenhouse gas emissions through this planning process? Thank you.
Well, mine is easy because I am not the VMT calculation expert at my office. That's actually Chris Ganson, who many of you may know, but I will take that question back to him on the VMT calculation and get back to you. So thanks for the question.
I think I have the next one. So I think I have an easy answer, but then perhaps a more full answer. So the easy answer is that the cap says the date is 2035, but we're redoing our cap right now. And I do think that we need to focus a little bit. So that the existing goal, it's about commute trips. And I personally feel that that whole way of thinking and focusing so much on commute trips, it's really oriented towards reducing traffic congestion at the peak rather than being driven by what are our GHG goals and how do we hit them. So I think we need to look at all trips. Not everyone even has a job. Not everyone is commuting every day. Commute patterns are changing so much. So I think we need to have a little bit of a broader perspective of how are people using transit, bike, and walk in their daily life on all trips, you know, going to the store, going to the gym. There's trips happening everywhere that create GHG emissions that I do think we need to be accounting for, not just those commute peak trips.
So I'm last in the string of questions. We look through the prism of VMT and all the actions and all of the proposals that are made by county staff for consideration by the decision makers. In fact, you know, one of the primary goals with our community plan updates is to explore ways of reducing VMTs. It's certainly a challenge when we're dealing with communities that are located far away from centers, far away from transit services and jobs. And so in order to address that, you know, our approach is to identify various options that take into consideration the different perspectives and desires of the communities that we are working for. And so in response to Mr. Chu's question, I think we had developed an alternative in addition to the one that you had mentioned that increases the availability of land for development, but an alternative that focuses development inward within the village of Alpine. Now that doesn't necessarily result in significant VMT reductions, but it does avoid significant VMT increases. And so we always take the balanced approach in terms of our planning efforts, provide the data and the analysis, and you know, have that accompany the options that are presented for decision.
Thank you. I was only looking for yes or no answers, but I take that as a no.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go to the remainder of board members who have their hands up. Mayor Sotelo Solis.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you again to the staff, our panelists for all of their great work, and looking forward to continuing the dialogue. My question is for Kate at the statewide level. Do you see that other regions are doing and kind of visioning the way we are doing with the big 5 moves? And so I'll let you answer that. And if you are, then what is it? And if not, give us kudos.
I mean, I'll give you kudos anyway, because I think the Big 5 and the Sandag plans and the regional plan are really exciting and groundbreaking, and you know, particularly in this region, which is very diverse, has a lot going on in it. So kudos no matter what. But you know, yes, San Diego's not out there as a first mover with nobody else. There are other regions, and they're not where you'd think. Sacramento, SACOG is doing some really exciting stuff in terms of, you know, a kind of integrated VMT strategy. They've also got some rural areas, some small town pieces, and they're doing a similar approach. And so I'd look at that. Really exciting work in Coachella, of all places, on trying to get to some of these same types of goals and strategies. So we really have diverse regions across the state working together, trying to figure out how to kind of accomplish where we need to go, because it's what the state's saying, but as I said earlier, it's what everybody's, this is where the economy is going. So trying to get to where we go, trying to be people-centered, trying to have region-driven solutions. What my job is, in my estimation, is to figure out how the state can support that. We want to see these plans. We're excited about these plans. We want to do what we can to make it easier for you to access state services, state resources, and for us to really lift up these strategies because they're so exciting.
I think anytime that you can reaffirm that that the state does want to help in whatever manner that is, as municipal leaders, it really reinforces that relationship and the strength that we have as a region, as a cog, but also in partnership with the state. So thank you again. Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So next we have Mayor Jones.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you so much to the panelists for your time today. I have a question specifically, and I think it might be for you, Kate Gordon, but I'm not entirely sure. So when we're talking about trying to change behaviors and still allowing people their independence in a balanced transportation system, a lot of people want to do the right thing, like myself, investing in cars that are better, electric cars. And so I guess one of my concerns is that we're asking people to switch over to electric cars, when they do need to get places and they want to have their independence in what they need to do on a daily basis. Though I've been told that our greenhouse gas reductions do not count for San Diego County; they count for the state. If we that the infrastructure we're actually building in the county helps us, but what happens is our reductions in our vehicles in applying in those electric cars is not actually counting toward our greenhouse reductions. So if you could please address that. I'm just wondering why that is, because that doesn't make sense to me. And then also, if we could possibly change that, because we locally, if we try to do the right thing, we should actually get credit for that, in my opinion.
Thanks so much for the question. I will probably let Rami answer the specific question about the way that the numbers are counted. I'll just say at a higher level, this isn't one thing or another thing. This is really a kind of all of the above strategy. We really do, and the governor's putting a huge amount, I think $1.5 billion in the January budget proposal, into zero emission vehicle infrastructure and building that out around the state, particularly in areas that have not been well served in the past. But with that infrastructure, we're also putting significant new dollars into vehicle retirement and replacement so that our folks with cars that can't pass smog, that are 20 plus years old, are able to get vouchers for turning those in and for getting used electric and hybrid vehicles. So really trying to push on the vehicle side as well. But we also need to be doing, what we've been talking about around land use. And I kind of think of it as being like electricity, right? We want to, when we plug something in, we want what's behind the plug to be, renewable as possible, solar, wind, moving toward a cleaner grid. But we also need to be thinking about, running our dishwashers in the middle of the day when the sun is up instead of doing it at night. That's a behavior change, but it's one that capitalizes on these amazing resources we have and technologies we have as a state. Kind of the same thing here, thinking about how and where we drive, also thinking about, that technology switch out is sort of, again, all of the above and something the state wants to support. In terms of what's counted toward the GHG, and I think you might be talking about this sustainable community strategy accounting on GHGs, but Rami, I'm hoping you have an answer on that one, or Mike.
I want to make sure I answer the mayor's question. And so can you just reframe for me what were you looking for in terms of the calculations?
So my understanding is that when we invest in electric vehicles, that we don't get a credit for that as reducing our greenhouse gases here in San Diego County, that credit then goes to the state, which doesn't make any sense, because then the incentive is not actually being realized here locally when we're trying to actually meet these targets. And I know I talk to a lot of people on a pretty regular basis that say, yeah, I'm gonna help reduce our greenhouse gases here locally because I'm going to invest in an electric car. And then I tell them, well, actually, you're helping the state, but you're not actually helping our region, unfortunately. So that's what I'm getting at.
So what you bring up is the issue of additional or additivity to, like, what actions are you providing that are addition to what the state is taking credit for in terms of its actions. You know, what we did in one of our approaches towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions through installing EV charging stations, the approach we took was to identify what were the assumptions the state made in terms of the number of EV charging installations or the number of EVs on the road, and how our actions could go beyond that. And so if we were able to demonstrate that we're in excess of what the state had anticipated, then there is opportunity to take credit for those reductions that are in excess of what they have accounted for.
I guess I'm more trying to get at, if, okay, let's say my community, for instance, and I'm a very small part of the county, but only about 100,000 people. But if we take a large investment and say take, you know, 20,000 cars, I'm just throwing out a number, 20,000 cars off of the roads, and in my community's investing in electric vehicles, we don't actually realize that here locally, it would be the state that actually receives that credit, correct? Or am I not understanding that exactly?
I'm going to
Chair
jump in and ask.
Blakesley, I could maybe help.
Yeah, I'm
with
going to
this.
jump in and ask staff to answer this.
Yes, thank you, Chair and Mayor Jones and panelists. This is like something we've talked a lot about, and that is Senate Bill 375, which is the law that SANDAG needs to comply with in terms of our regional plan and how and what we're allowed to count in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And the goal that the state has set for SANDAG to meet in our plan is a 19% reduction, GHG reduction per person. And that is calculated based upon land use and transportation coming together. So it's reducing vehicle miles traveled, shortening trips. That's what we have to do with the regional plan. The region still benefits significantly from electrification of our fleet and electrification of all vehicles. And when we talk about kind of how we're counting what, it's true that that if we were going to contribute more toward that 19%, it's after there's a certain number of vehicles that are already electric within the San Diego region, and then we could build upon that 19%. I think the important thing here to recognize is that what the state is doing to help influence the EVs, that's a big contributor to reducing greenhouse gases in our region. We have our part through the regional plan, and then there's the part that happens at the local level. And collectively, that gets us a much larger greenhouse gas reduction per capita. So hopefully that clarifies it a little bit when we talk about kind of what we can count. It's still a really important part of the puzzle in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, is the investment in electric vehicles.
And if I may, Mayor Blakesley, just to add a little bit, Mayor Jones, there is a state goal. I think Kate Gordon talked about it last time, like let us say 5 million electric vehicles by 2035. I don't know the exact number. That's already embedded in the baseline. So we as a state take a credit for the baseline. Anything beyond that, if we do additional, I think we can get credit for it, but it probably be an ambitious goal to meet the state baseline. Now, one could argue that if the state didn't have such a baseline, our 19% might be higher. So we do get credit over all on the cars, but you're right, it gets counted toward the baseline, not the additional reduction.
Okay, thank
well,
you.
unfortunately,
I just wanted to add more. I want to make sure the panel's only here till 11, and I really want to make sure that the other two have their hands up, and we can get back to these questions of staff after, but I'd really like to move on now to Mayor Hall.
Thank you, and thank you, staff and everyone here today. in every one of these sessions, I've heard the word autonomous vehicles and technology, but yet I've really never heard an in-depth conversation about this. And what I wonder about is how big a role will autonomous vehicles play in our mobility plan? And when do you see that actually coming to fruition?
It's it's a tough question. There's a lot of different factors that go into autonomous vehicle. As you can imagine, a lot of it is about just safety and figuring out regulations, many of which are at the local level. The state has a framework in which we're thinking about autonomous vehicles, and our Public Utilities Commission does a certain amount of regulation there. But really, it comes down to local law in terms of testing. That's kind of where we are with AVs right now. Is we're in the testing phase, and there are cities that have just essentially banned it, and then there are places that have said, we're open to thinking about it and doing it. Most of those are not in California. Actually, a lot of testing is happening in Nevada and Arizona at this point. But it's a tough question. I think it's coming, and if you were, I am no, seer or anything, but I would just say, just given the different factors from the policy and regulatory perspective, I would say that I expect that the kind of earliest movers will be fleet vehicles, and probably not in dense urban areas, really in more of the sort of suburb, delivery fleet vehicle kind of stuff, more suburban and rural, because it's just easier from a safety perspective, and it's actually, I think, really will make a big difference. So, not a great answer, but best I can do.
Okay, thank you. Council or Mayor Dedina.
Oh, hey, thanks everybody. Great panelists. I almost started crying when I heard our county, or Rami, talk about carbon farming. Like, to hear the county start articulating its goal of doing more carbon farming is something we talked about for a long time, and great to see that. The reality is San Diego's doing the whole region is doing a lot of great things, but we need to continue to do even more to be a global leader in this. So, and then Kate, obviously the natural climate solutions piece is genius. We need to do a lot more. The only thing I'm going to say is, I think Montecito showed and Bel Air showed and the wildfires showed that all of us are impacted by climate change and wildfires and natural disasters, but some of us can recover more quickly than others. So that's the equity piece, right? Like, how do we, first of all, help communities that don't have a lot of money, like Imperial Beach, right? Where Mark told us coastal flooding was coming with his great tool, and the federal government was closed. So then Imperial Beach had to spend money to clean up a federal wildlife refuge because, Trump closed the government down for some crazy reason. Like, he was mad about something. So, that was money taken from the lifeguard program, right? But so that's the equity piece, right? Number two, I think that we have to really get this state talks a great game. We all talk great games. We're really obsessed with planning and words, but we're like an ossified bureaucracy. Like, climate change is accelerating and our state moves really slowly. We all move really slowly. So we got to figure out how to get everything, the planning done really quickly, and get the money into the field and on the ground really quickly. That's it. Like, we're moving the right direction, but man, it's way too slow. So we got a lot of work to do, and I'm glad we're moving in the right direction, but my goal is to push you guys to do a lot more, because my community is being hammered by man-made climate disasters all the time. And that's why we were the world's first city to do a climate lawsuit. And that's the final piece. The state of California is an oil state. We're doing business with oil companies and sucking oil out of the ground and making a lot of money from it, but we got to stop being an oil state and move to the future. So that's it. But thanks a lot for all the great work you're doing.
Okay.
Thanks, Mayor.
Yeah, did you want to make a comment, Kate?
No, just to say thanks. Good comments.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you so much to this esteemed panel. We've been so grateful to have had you today and been able to pick your brain a little bit and hear what thoughts you have, what's on your mind, and where we're going. So I think we'll sign off unless there was any last thing that you wanted to say. I don't see. Scott, you're good. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll go back to I think the staff has a final presentation related to this topic that they want to do.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Chair, and to all of our panelists. One of the things that we didn't bring out specifically in the panel discussion that I thought was worth noting here, and that is the fact that we're working on the regional plan the same time that the City of San Diego is updating their climate action plan, and the same time that the county is working on their climate plan. So we are all going to be using the same baseline data that will then allow us to measure our success going forward. So anyway, thank you again for that great panel discussion.
I think we have
your
public
insights and
comments.
perspectives are so valuable as we move forward. So let's just hone in for a minute on the legislative mandates. And this kind of gets to what Mayor Jones had brought up too. As we work to set the goals for the regional plan, we considered the state, federal mandates and identified specific targets related to civil rights, air quality, environmental protection. So all those federal aspects are being met. It's Senate Bill 375 that requires us, SANDAG, to demonstrate how we will meet our per capita greenhouse gas reduction of 19% from 2005 levels by the year 2035. And so in doing so, in showing the state how we are achieving that 19%, we have to do something kind of shorthand, we call it show our math. We submit the technical methodology for how that's calculated using our model. We submit that to the California Air Resources Board. And as we mentioned last Friday at the board meeting, that we recently received approval for the technical methodology from the state of California, confirming the accuracy of the methodology in estimating the greenhouse gas reduction. So this is a big milestone for the 2021 regional plan and gives us confidence in our modeling and estimates for the greenhouse gas reductions. We've talked about most of the mandates in previous presentations and discussions with you, and we are meeting these requirements. An area we have not talked a lot about is with respect to the California Environmental Quality Act and Senate Bill 743. 743 is a new law since we did the regional plan in 2015, and that requires that new transportation projects do not increase vehicle miles traveled. It also has important streamlining opportunities for infill development. So some of the things that the City of San Diego Planning Director was talking about to support infill development and how the streamlining of CEQA, so really kind of simplifying the CEQA process to make infill development easier. And I'm going to ask Allison Wood, our excellent project manager for the regional plan, to talk about how SANDAG is setting the stage for the local jurisdictions to be able to take advantage of that Senate Bill 743 streamlining.
SB 743 has important implications for local planning that are influenced by the regional plan. This law makes it easier to build infill development in transit priority areas, or TPAs. And these are areas that are within a half mile of a major transit stop. Here's the 2035 transit network proposed in this plan. As we build out the transit network, we have more areas in the region that meet the TPA definition. Here are those transit priority areas in green that qualify for environmental streamlining. And these are similar to our mobility hub areas. The 2021 regional plan includes a land use pattern that focuses housing and job growth primarily in the mobility hub network. Mobility hubs represent areas of activity, destinations, and places that will continue to be vibrant centers of the community in the future. This pattern of growth is critical to bringing people and jobs closer together and meeting our greenhouse gas reduction goals. People must be able to shorten their commutes, have mobility options, and live in communities with access to goods and services to meet their basic needs. Many of you are updating your local plans to allow for more housing in these areas. And we heard about the City of San Diego's efforts from Mike today. The regional plan will include programs that will bring more resources for smart growth and affordable housing, particularly in mobility hubs and TPAs. Now, as the panel discussed, decisions about where and how we grow also impact our preservation of natural and working lands. We need our open space and agricultural lands to both grow the plants that can store carbon and improve our resilience to climate impacts like wildfires. The land use pattern in the regional plan allows us to meet the needs of future residents while respecting the natural beauty that makes the San Diego region a special place. Our coastal bluffs, rivers, wetlands, bays, and lagoons, our inland valleys and hills blanketed with chaparral and oak, to our mountains that rise over 5,000 feet, and the Onzabrego Desert, the largest state park in California. This unique topography and Mediterranean climate make our region a biodiversity hotspot. We are the most biologically rich county in the continental US. Many agencies, land managers, scientists, and individuals have worked together for a very long time to protect and connect habitats in our region. Understanding the threats of climate change to all species means that our efforts to protect natural lands are more important than ever. Similarly, our climate makes San Diego County an ideal place to grow a variety of crops. Our region is home to more than 5,000 farmers. We have more small farms than any other county. These are local food sources that also sequester carbon. As we heard from our panel today, we cannot get to carbon neutrality without preserving our natural and working lands. The transformative transportation network of the regional plan is one part of the solution, and our land use pattern is another. We talked a lot about partnerships and their importance, but how does this come together in the regional plan? The draft 2021 regional plan will include 11 policy and program areas. Some of these are directly related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Others are policy areas that we've heard are important to you, our board members, and members of our community. In total, the draft regional plan proposes more than $8 billion in programs for local jurisdictions, tribal nations, residents, and businesses. I'm not going into detail on all of these today, but we have informational one-pagers on each available on SANDAG's website and linked in your staff report. For now, let me highlight a couple examples of the types of programs and partnerships that you'll see in the draft regional plan and how the state, the region, and local agencies each have a unique role. Let's consider Vision Zero programs. Vision Zero is a commitment to ending traffic fatalities and serious injuries. Achieving Vision Zero requires collaboration across all levels of government to make our streets safer. In this case, the state can play a role, making it easier to reduce speed limits and by providing funding to local and regional agencies. We see SANDAG's role as a regional resource, gathering crash data and helping to understand impacts to different communities. This statistic in the center of the slide for pedestrian danger by race and ethnicity is based on national data and shows that Black and American Indian populations are at heightened risk of pedestrian danger. This is an example of the type of data we can gather for our region. The draft regional plan proposes Vision Zero programs to offer grants and technical assistance for local jurisdictions. At the local level, your jurisdictions are responsible for implementing projects and designing streets to make them safer. And we can all collaborate on efforts to encourage safe driving. Let's dig into one more example. When it comes to electric vehicles, as we discussed, SANDAG can't take too much credit for greenhouse gas reductions toward our 19% target. However, the transition to EVs is an important strategy for meeting those broader state and local climate goals. The state is working toward an all-electric vehicle fleet. They set regulations for auto manufacturers to put more EVs on the road in our region and everywhere in California. At SANDAG, we've focused on readiness planning for EVs and ensuring that our region has adequate charging infrastructure. Recently, SANDAG partnered with the California Energy Commission, the County Air Pollution Control District, and Center for Sustainable Energy to launch the Cali VIP incentive program for charging. The regional plan will propose more funding for charging and a regional incentive program for vehicles. Local governments have a really important role here too. Permit streamlining for charger installations, updating codes for new development, shifting your fleet to zero-emission vehicles, and installing stations in your community. These are steps your jurisdictions can take in support of EVs. As we heard from our panelists, we have shared goals when it comes to climate change, housing, mobility, and social equity. And the solutions we need to address these challenges are not simple. Partnering and collaboration is truly the only way we can do it. And the San Diego region is poised to lead in this area. We have a history of success, a foundation of coordinated, data-driven planning to build upon. And most importantly, we all want to do what is best for current and future residents of this region.
Thank you, Allison. And I hope it's become very clear through our discussion today that the regional plan is much more than just a transportation plan. It includes all sorts of programs to help support local planning. And just a couple of examples, we're working right now on a housing incentive program. So building upon what Kate Gordon talked about with the housing funding that's available and pairing that up with our Transnet Smart Growth Incentive Program funding so that we can really support you in implementing your housing goals. And I think an example, Mayor Jones, you've talked about having affordable housing projects ready to be built, but missing that gap financing. They can't get financed. We're hopeful that we can put together a program that can help bring those projects to fruition. I think the electric vehicle charging questions that Supervisor Anderson has raised, which are really valid. How do we ensure that we have the electricity necessary to support all of that? And that's where we need to work together to make sure we're focused on renewable energy and energy that is more readily available over time. So we really appreciate your time today. And in terms of next steps, since last August, we've had the pleasure to present various aspects of the plan to you. As we've mentioned, we're in the final stretch to get to the May 28th release of the draft plan. You've heard about how we turned the vision into the regional plan and how we've used modeling and data to develop the plan and the cost estimates. We did the discussion with all of you on the detailed cost estimates and how to potentially finance the plan. We took a deep dive into the technology, including a discussion on autonomous vehicles and how technology is the major disruptor of the transportation system, but affords us new opportunities that we've never seen before to optimize the infrastructure that we have today and what could be tomorrow. We had the focus on social equity last week, and today you heard about how we can align our state, regional, and local goals working together to address climate change, housing, equity challenges, and all the things that are so important to the quality of life in this region. We're very much looking forward to the workshops that the chair mentioned at the beginning. We will be taking a deeper dive into really the system, the transportation system and all of its components. And we want to provide that opportunity for you to ask as many questions as you like about that. So those two workshops are planned for close to the last week of May, just before we release the plan on May 28th. So we're very much looking forward to having the policy advisory committees along with working groups and community members to participate in these upcoming workshops. And we really look forward to continuing to work with all of you as we work to adopt the plan at the end of 2021. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to call on Mayor Huebner and then we'll go to the public comments.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the staff presentation as well as the panel. I'm going to ask a question. I've been wanting to ask this question, and it doesn't seem to, presentation doesn't always lend itself to it, but there's a nexus here, so I'm going to jump in. And that is, how can we align these state goals with local flexibility? I know we all know, one size does not fit all, one solution does not fit all. And in the past, we used to hear things like, well, I can't ask city X to do so-and-so without asking city Y. Well, that's old thinking. New thinking is well, yes, you can, because there's a distinction between equality, which was the old, and equity, which is providing the tailored solutions, right, to each community. So where this is leading is, we talked a little bit about transit priority areas today, and around those transit priority areas are things called mobility hubs. And we've seen that they have different monikers to them. Some are employment centers and some are coastal. As we heard from Kate this morning on our panel, the smart move is to be building near employment centers. Yet when we discuss mobility hubs, what we're hearing is that's where dense housing goes. We hear the same concepts in both employment centers and coastal. We in the coastal zone have different priorities. It's, you know, visitor access, et cetera. We're happy to build there, but it's not exactly 100% the priority. So I'm wondering if there's, number one, mandates that come with these mobility hubs that we haven't heard about yet. Are there strings to them? Where does that local flexibility come in when we're speaking about joining with the region and achieving our regional goals? And we, as you know, Solana Beach is very environmentally progressive, and we're on board with all of this, but I'm just very concerned about the local flexibility.
So Mayor Huebner, that is an outstanding question. I think the important thing here is that mobility hubs are probably the area that we need to work the most closely with all of you. This is the place where we're, as a region, looking to make major investments in the transportation system, and we need to make sure that matches up with the planned land use. Ultimately, how the mobility hubs get planned, that's a local planning effort. And so part of the $8 billion that Allison talked about in terms of incentives, that's really funding that we want to provide to locals to do that more detailed planning. While we show these mobility hub areas on a map, those are really just rough sort of blobs that need to be refined through a local planning process. So that's something we want to collaborate on. Without a doubt, it's not one size fits all. I think today we heard from the City of San Diego and the County of San Diego and the very different approach they're taking in their climate planning. And that has to be recognized, the different characteristics of all 19 jurisdictions in the region. And it is not a one size fits all.
So when do we do that collaboration in this process? When do the cities get to sit down with staff?
So right now, this is all being done at a very high level, identifying these areas. Once the plan is done, that's when we dig into more detail. So the same way that we're working on these comprehensive corridor plans, that's where we take kind of what are the lines on the transportation lines on the map and the areas that are shown as mobility hubs, and we take that to the next level of detail. And then we go to the next level of detail, working more closely with you. So it's once we have the plan in place, that's what sets in motion the opportunity to work in more detail about what these really look like for each of the locals.
So are you going to be asking us to vote on a plan before we know how it impacts our city?
So
these areas have to be, I don't know, do I hear Hassan wanting to jump in? But I think the important thing here is that, okay.
So I would say, Mayor Huebner, so these mobility hubs, most of them are around transit, major transit stations or even transit centers. And these actually, the mobility hubs were, when we did the regional housing need assessment allocation, where actually most of the future housing would hope to go there. Now, we don't have local land use authorities, but we will have the ability and the funding to work with the cities to develop those. Some of them are, for example, we're working with the United States Navy on the NAVWAR. That's the largest mobility hub. We're going to work with the city of San Diego to make sure that whatever we propose there is consistent with their general plan. Some of them are more advanced than others, like the San Isidro or the major mobility hub. The other ones, we definitely need to work once the plan is adopted, once we have the resources. I mean, it's all about resources. Once we have the resources, we will work with the local cities on our ideas and see how that fits into the local plans. But absolutely, some of them are in different stages than others, but this is the places where we hope future housing, at least for the next 8 years, the 171,000 that we allocated is going to be mostly.
So we have done our RENA numbers. We have the RENA obligations, and we've done those. So are there going to be more obligations that come with mobility hubs? Because maybe our RENA numbers aren't necessarily all at these mobility hubs. And again, there's distinctions between employment centers and coastal. And coastal, again, has an obligation to serve visitors. Additionally, our train station, as you know, is at least 70% Amtrak riders who they come and park and go elsewhere in the region. So I am concerned that the mandates or strings would be the same for something like downtown San Diego, an urban center where there's a lot of jobs, and a small coastal Carlsbad, coastal Encinitas, coastal Solana Beach mobility hub. Can you give us some distinctions between those two and what is going to be required of us?
I can't give you at this time, but once we adopt the plan and we have the resources to move forward, we're absolutely going to give you not only distinction, and it's not going to be above and beyond the allocation. We're not going to say you're going to have to build more unless you want to. This is a land use issue that the city is in control of. But let me just make it very clear that if we don't develop the ideas of linking land use and transportation, changing the urban form, I don't think we're going to achieve our 19% reduction. And that is exactly what today's workshops, we need to work together, local, county, regional. There's a lot of questions to be answered yet that it's not here, but it will be, and it has to be. And I think, again, we have no land use authority, no land use authority, no desire, but we do have resources and we have the know-how to present and work with you collaboratively to do this.
I think I've been clear about my concerns, and I would like to work more closely with you sooner rather than later.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's go to the public comment.
We have three public comments, and we now have 4. First public comment is Gretchen Newsome. Gretchen, please unmute yourself and you may speak.
Sorry, this is Gretchen Newsome with IBEW Local 569. Had a little technical error. I just wanted to thank SANDAG for hosting this panel and for the staff report. Transportation contributes over 40% of our region's climate pollution, and a regional transportation plan that doesn't just meet but exceeds statewide climate targets and helps our cities meet and exceed their own local climate action plan goals is essential to reducing dangerous emissions. And the 5 big moves is a major opportunity for change. And as we've said in prior comments and letters, we urge SANDAG to put forward a bold plan that exceeds minimum baselines and helps deliver a safer, healthier, more equitable, and resilient future. And on a personal note, it was such a treat to hear from Kate Gordon and everything that she provided. She's a true goddess of climate action and planning. Thank you.
Our next public speaker is Mike Bullock. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Well, it was good to hear from the panel. However, it was concerning because I never heard them talk about climate stabilization. They use terminology like more sustainable. That's not going to work. We don't keep making things more sustainable. And then they use the word sustainable. That's quite an assertion, isn't it? It is sustainable. What does that really mean? That means we achieve a climate stabilizing target. And they don't talk in that way. I'm not the only person that talks about climate stabilization. I'm a control systems engineer. So of course I look at things going unstable, and I want to stabilize any system, and especially our climate system. But just for your information, in 2011, Sandag had a regional transportation plan and they came out with a draft environmental impact report, and you got a letter from the Attorney General of the state of California. And she talked about climate stabilization. She said that the mandates are clearly about stabilization, and so you can't ignore them. And I was hopeful. People in authority were understanding what we're facing as a human species and trying to survive on this planet. There was an awful lot of talk about zoning, about land use, land use, land use, land use. If you understand what the target is, and it's 2030, and it's a very large reduction, you realize zoning is not going to be fast enough. I don't disagree with the zoning, but we need transportation measures, enforceable measures to reduce driving. That's what I did not hear. That's not what is in the climate action plans. The climate action plans are not climate stabilization plans. They just take some action. That's very unfortunate terminology. Either we succeed or we do not. And all that talk about land use, it's not enough. And when you talk about specific targets that you must meet, and not because it's stated in law, but it's because the climate scientists are describing them, then that is really reality. That's what we actually have to do. And of course, I was concerned with, do we get credit for this? Do we get credit for that? SB 375 is very clear. It's vehicle miles traveled. You have to reduce vehicle miles traveled. And isn't that what we should want for our children and our grandchildren? We want, this is not about taking credit for this and that. This is about whether we are going to succeed or not. And so those are my comments. Thank you.
Our next public speaker is Nicole Burgess.
Hi, thank you again. I want to succeed, and so that's why I am here. I'm going to do my best to try to note all of the ones that I have on my notes. I have 10 quick points I'm going to try to get to. Appreciate all the panelists. Thank you, thank you. You were wonderful. Kate Gordon, OPR. Yes, it's about getting AB 117. Let's get those bikes, e-bikes, in those communities that we need to get those bikes into, and then we need to build that infrastructure. The one really that inspired me to speak right now is Allison Wood. Thank you so much. Programs and policies, thank you for embracing Vision Zero. All of our cities, all 19 jurisdictions, including Caltrans, thank you Caltrans, Gustavo, for embracing Vision Zero. We cannot continue to lose lives on our street. Wonderful discussions from Serge and Allison about the natural environments, regenerative agriculture, smart farming, taking care of our waterways. Let's take back a little vision and just imagine along our Bayshore Bikeway that's almost complete, 24 miles. And then we roll down the San Diego River all the way out to really Julian. And here I want to see Troyes Creek. It's right through the middle of that hot density of equity screaming. Three, where's my three? Can we add, Allison, maybe a program that incentivizes and changes that cultural shift of a program through iCommute that incentivizes healthy commutes? Bike SC has worked on a healthy commuter incentive program for the city of San Diego. Hope to discuss more with any of you. 5, EV is not the only strategy. It's actually not the greatest strategy. It's actually really not efficient. 100 bikes is much more efficient. Martin, Mike Counsel, it is not about just transit trips. It is about every trip, right? Complete 10, I'm going to just skip to 10 because complete corridors, mobility hubs are the big two things in that big, bold 5 vision, and how we connect those through the mobility hubs through active transportation. So I'm going to take a little Amsterdam and Escondido with Mayor up there and go over to Rebecca Jones and see the most bike utopia camp university site ever, and go to Oceanside where they already have 6% ridership. And so what, San Diego, what are they doing right? You know, I guess I'm gonna take a quick breath. Got about 10 seconds and I'm just gonna say, go Padres, And imagine going to Padres on a bike. It's actually all super fun, especially if you live up in north, you get a transit commute along that beautiful coastline. So much better than a car. Thank you. Have a wonderful, wonderful day in Bike Month.
Our final public speaker, Madison Coleman. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, I'll start speaking. Okay. Hi, my name is Madison Coleman with Climate Action Campaign. Thank you to SANDAG staff and the panelists for today's presentation on aligning state, regional, and local planning. The state's strongest climate goal, Executive Order B5518, calls for carbon neutrality as soon as possible and no later than 2045. The most up-to-date climate science says that we must entirely eliminate emissions to stave off the most devastating impacts of the climate emergency. We urge SANDAG to adopt a 2021 regional plan that will put us on the path to zero carbon. Additionally, the City of San Diego's Climate Action Plan set bold, sustainable transportation targets. 50% of commuters traveling by bike, walk, and transit by 2035. Transportation accounts for more emissions than any other sector, so we must transition people out of their fossil fuel cars. The 2021 regional plan must help the city to achieve those mode share targets. And finally, we urge SANDAG to work closely with each of the local jurisdictions to advance equitable development of housing near jobs and transit, especially for low-income residents. By allowing more San Diegans to bike, walk, and take transit-oriented infill development is key to tackling both the housing and climate crisis. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that concludes public speakers. So we're going to close this item. There's no action required. We do have a closed session, which should not take too long. And just as a reminder, the closed session came in your email from clerk of the board at 4:38 yesterday afternoon, 4:38 p.m. if you need to search for that closed session link. And I just want to ask, do we have any public comments on closed session?
Chair Blakespear, I do not see any hands raised for public comments on this item.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, then we'll leave this here and go over to the closed session now. So see you there.
Closed, was no reportable action taken.
Okay, thank you very much. Then this concludes our business for today. Our next meeting is on May 14th at 9 a.m. We will see you then, and we are adjourned.